I once read somewhere that the most dangerous person in a woman's life is the one she loves. I didn't believe it until I found these cases. If this is your first time here, welcome to the Story Vault, where we open the files the world tried to close. If you've been rocking with us, you already know what we do here. And if these kinds of stories move you, hit that subscribe button. It's a small tap that means everything to this channel. Now let's get into it. Marie Singleton was the kind of woman who carried the weight of the world and still smiled doing it. 4 kids. A demanding job. A life that, from the outside, looked like it was finally coming together. What nobody knew, not her neighbors, not even most of her family, was that Marie worked for the CIA. Not in the movies. Not in a thriller novel. In real life. She was a communications specialist, and she was good at her job. Disciplined. Focused. Private. But even the most disciplined people make one decision that changes everything. For Marie, that decision was Andre Jackson. She married him believing in something better. A partner. A protector. What she got instead was a man who saw her independence as a threat. Andre was controlling in the way that starts quiet, a comment here, a restriction there, until one day you look up and realize the walls have been closing in for years. By November of 1994, Marie had had enough. She made a decision. She was leaving him. And on the night of November 11, 1994, she told him. Nobody knows exactly what was said in that conversation. Nobody knows how his face changed when those words left her mouth. What investigators would later piece together is that sometime that night, inside their garage in Englewood, California, Andre Jackson wrapped his hands around his wife's throat and squeezed until she stopped moving. She was 33 years old. He staged everything. The scene was made to look like a random attack, the kind of thing that happens to women who are in the wrong place at the wrong time. Then he drove her body, locked it in the trunk of her own Saab, and left the car near Docker State Beach like she was just gone. The next morning, Andre Jackson walked into a police station and reported his wife missing. He stood in that lobby and performed grief so badly that officers took notice. Not because he seemed devastated. Because he didn't. He threw a tantrum. He demanded answers. He made the whole thing about him, about how inconvenient this was, about how nobody was doing enough. Then he went and washed his car. Think about that for a second. Your wife is missing. The police are involved. And your next move is a car wash. Investigators found Marie's body days later, still in the trunk of her Saab, after a stranger saw a missing flyer and made a phone call that changed everything. When forensics processed the car, they found what Andre had tried so hard to scrub away. Blood. And beneath Marie's fingernails, skin cells. DNA that told a story no amount of cleaning could erase. But here's where the case takes a turn that will make your stomach drop. Even with the evidence, Andre Jackson walked free. The technology to fully process the DNA in 1994 wasn't where it needed to be. The case went cold. Marie's 4 children grew up without their mother. Years passed. A decade passed. And Andre Jackson lived his life like nothing happened. But cold cases have a way of waking up. In 2003, investigators pulled Marie's case back out of the files and sent the DNA evidence for retesting. The science had caught up. And this time, the results came back clean, clear, and damning. The DNA under Marie's fingernails matched Andre Jackson. The blood in the car matched Andre Jackson. There was nowhere left to hide. By 2008, 14 years after he killed her, Andre Jackson was arrested. He sat across from prosecutors and was offered a plea deal, voluntary manslaughter, a reduced sentence, a way out. He turned it down. Maybe he still believed he could outsmart the system. Maybe the arrogance that made him think he could get away with murder in the first place never actually left. In April 2012, after a 6-week trial, a jury looked at Andre Jackson and found him guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to 25 years to life. Marie's children were in that courtroom. 18 years after losing their mother, they finally heard the word that had been a long time coming. Guilty. But even in that moment of justice, something sits heavy. Because Marie knew. Before she died, she knew she was in danger. She had already decided to leave. She had already taken that step. And it still wasn't enough to save her. That's the part that doesn't leave you. Now. If Marie's case is about what happens behind closed doors, the next case is about what happens when someone simply vanishes. No body. No crime scene. Just silence and a man with too many secrets and not enough conscience. Christy Russo was born in Beaumont, Texas, on January 18, 1990. People who knew her described her the same way: warm, caring, the kind of person who would give you her last dollar and mean it. But Christy's life had fractures running through it. Substance abuse. Legal trouble. The kind of cycle that's easier to judge from the outside than to escape from the inside. On October 20, 2021, Christy was released from jail. She had her whole life ahead of her. People who loved her were waiting. And for a brief window, it seemed like maybe this time would be different. It wasn't. Within days of her release, Christy found herself at the home of a man named Colby Hunter Tatum. Tatum was the kind of person who existed in the margins, not someone you'd necessarily fear on sight, but someone who, if you paid close enough attention, didn't quite add up. His girlfriend, Mari Collier, was there too. What happened inside that house is something only Tatum and Collier know fully. What the outside world knows is this: Christy Russo walked into that house. And she never walked out the same way. Her family started calling. No answer. They started showing up. Nothing. The silence stretched from days into weeks, and the dread that had been sitting in their chests turned into something heavier. They reported her missing. Investigators started pulling at threads. Witnesses began coming forward, and their stories didn't match Tatum's version of events at all. His alibi had holes. His timeline shifted. And then investigators found something that made the case take a sharp, dark turn. Christy's belongings, her personal items, were found discarded near Tatum's property. Not lost. Not forgotten. Thrown away. Like she was something to be disposed of. And then there was the gun. Mari Collier had pawned a revolver. A revolver that investigators believed was the weapon used to kill Christy Russo. She had walked into a pawn shop, handed over the gun, and walked out with cash, as if that was a normal Tuesday. But without a body, the case was like trying to hold water in your hands. By 2023, the FBI got involved. They searched Tatum's property with the kind of thoroughness that leaves nothing unturned. And they found bone fragments. They found clothing. Fragments of a life, scattered like Tatum thought the earth itself would keep his secret. It didn't. In December 2023, Colby Hunter Tatum was indicted for the murder of Christy Russo. And stay with me here, because this next part is important. When prosecutors laid the full weight of the evidence in front of Tatum, something shifted. The bone fragments. The clothing. The witnesses whose stories kept contradicting his. The girlfriend who had tried to disappear a murder weapon through a pawn shop window like it was just another Tuesday errand. All of it, stacked together, became a wall Tatum couldn't climb over. In 2025, Colby Hunter Tatum accepted a plea deal. He stood before a court and did something that killers rarely do voluntarily. He talked. He said that on the night Christy Russo died, he had been in a paranoid state. That the drugs had taken his mind somewhere dark and unrecognizable. That he hadn't planned it. That the gun went off and Christy dropped and panic swallowed everything that came after. He said it was an accident. Now, whether you believe that or not, whether the word accident even belongs in the same sentence as what happened to Christy Russo. What happened next is something her family had to sit with in silence for years. Because Tatum didn't just confess to shooting her. He confessed to what came after. To cremating her body. To scattering her remains. To making sure that the woman who once lit up a room with her warmth would never be found whole again. He reduced a human being to ash and called it panic. The court sentenced him to 20 years. 20 years for a life. 20 years for a mother's tears. 20 years for every unanswered phone call, every sleepless night, every prayer that went up from people who just wanted to know where she was. And Mari Collier, the girlfriend who walked into a pawn shop with a murder weapon and walked out with cash, was arrested for tampering with evidence. As of March 2026, her case is still pending. The story isn't finished for her yet. But here's what stays with you about Christy's case. It wasn't just the crime. It was the erasure. Tatum didn't just take her life, he tried to take her existence. He tried to make it so that there was nothing left to find, nothing left to bury, nothing left to grieve over properly. And for a while, it worked. For 2 years, Christy Russo was just a name on a missing persons report while the man responsible went about his days. That's the kind of evil that doesn't announce itself. It just quietly removes the evidence and waits. But justice, slow as it sometimes moves, kept moving. Now I need you to stay with me for this last case. Because out of everything in this video, and we have covered some dark territory today, this one is different. This one involves a level of calculated, cold-blooded planning that will genuinely make you stop and ask how human beings get to this place inside themselves. Michelle Lee Kderman was born on May 12, 1983, in Richland, Washington. People who grew up with Michelle described her as unapologetically herself, a self-described girly girl who loved hard and laughed loud. She was focused on her son Nathan in the way that only mothers who have been through something understand. He was her reason. But life had worn Michelle down in ways she hadn't fully recovered from. When her father died in 2005, something in her world tilted. She started moving in circles that weren't good for her. Substances. Wrong crowds. The kind of slow spiral that doesn't feel like falling until you're already at the bottom. And then she got involved with Daniel Pavak. Daniel was married. Everybody knew it. The affair wasn't a secret, not in the way affairs usually aren't secrets in small, tight-knit communities where everybody talks and nobody forgets. Michelle became pregnant with Daniel's child. And that pregnancy, that undeniable, visible proof of what had been going on, cracked something open in the life of a woman named Lacey Hurst Pavak. Lacey was Daniel's wife. And Lacey had been watching. And waiting. And calculating. By February of 2009, Michelle was visibly pregnant. The baby she was carrying was a living, breathing reminder of everything Lacey had been humiliated by. And somewhere in the space between humiliation and rage, Lacey Pavak made a decision that no amount of jealousy or heartbreak could ever justify. She decided Michelle had to die. But Lacey wasn't going to do it herself. That's what makes this case cut differently. She didn't act in a moment of passion. She didn't snap. She planned. She recruited. She orchestrated. She found two people, an acquaintance of Michelle's named Tansy Mathis and a man named Brent Phillips, and she built herself a wall of distance between her hands and the act she had commissioned. On February 28, 2009, Tansy Mathis reached out to Michelle. She used familiarity as a weapon, the way people sometimes do when they know you'll let your guard down around them. She told Michelle they were going somewhere together. Michelle had no reason to be suspicious. Tansy was someone she knew. They drove to a remote location. What happened next was not quick. It was not merciful. Brent Phillips, waiting at that location, attacked Michelle with an ice pick. The kind of violence that requires a person to make a choice, over and over again, in real time, to keep going. Michelle fought. She ran. She tried to find help. She made it to a road, bleeding and terrified and refusing to give up. But her injuries were too severe. Michelle Kderman died that day. And the child she was carrying, a life that had not yet had the chance to take a single breath outside of her, died with her. Investigators descended on the case with the kind of urgency that comes when a pregnant woman is found after a brutal attack in a remote location. The details didn't add up from the beginning. The rental car, a vehicle linked to the crime scene, was traced back to Lacey Pavic. Forensic teams processed it and found evidence that the cleaning that had been done was thorough but not thorough enough. The science, as it always does, found what human hands tried to hide. And then the confessions started coming. A man named David Richards, who had peripheral involvement in the events surrounding Michelle's death, eventually turned himself in on April 5, 2009. He told investigators what he knew. He named Phillips. He named Mathis. And the picture that had been fragmented began coming together into something ugly and complete. Brent Phillips, when confronted, initially tried to redirect blame onto Richards. But the evidence didn't support his version. Eventually, Phillips confessed. He pled guilty to multiple charges connected to Michelle's murder and to the death of her unborn child. He was sentenced to 26 years. Tansy Mathis, the woman who used friendship as bait, who lured Michelle to her death with a smile on her face, went to trial. On April 22, 2010, she was found guilty of aggravated first-degree murder. The sentence was life without the possibility of parole. And David Richards, whose involvement placed him inside the machinery of this conspiracy, was convicted of second-degree felony murder and manslaughter. He received 22 years. But the courtroom wasn't finished yet. Because at the center of all of it, the person whose jealousy had set every single one of these events into motion, was Lacey Hurst Pavic. When investigators confronted Lacey with everything they had, the rental car, the forensic evidence, the testimonies from the people she had used, she confessed. She sat down and she talked. And what came out of her mouth confirmed what the evidence had already been saying. She had planned it. She had funded it. She had pointed the finger at Michelle Kderman and said, in whatever words she used, that this woman needed to be gone. Lacey Pavic was convicted of aggravated first-degree murder and the manslaughter of an unborn child. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Daniel Pavic, the man at the center of it all, whose affair had pulled all of these lives into collision, disappeared briefly during the trials. He was never charged. Never held legally accountable for the chain of events his choices helped create. He walked away. And that is the part of this story that sits in your chest like something unresolved, because sometimes justice has edges that don't line up cleanly. 3 women. 3 cases. 3 men who believed they could take a life and outrun the truth. They were wrong. Forensic science caught up with Andre Jackson 14 years later and placed him exactly where he didn't want to be, in front of a jury that saw through everything. Tatum's attempt to erase Christy Russo's existence crumbled the moment those bone fragments surfaced from the earth he thought would stay silent. And the web Lacey Pavic spent weeks weaving unraveled the moment the people she trusted to keep her secret decided their own freedom mattered more than her secret. These cases are not just about crime. They are about what human beings are capable of when jealousy, control, and desperation are left unchecked. They are about the women who deserved better. About the children left behind. About the investigators who refused to let the files gather dust. And they are about the truth, which, no matter how long it takes, has a way of finding its way to the surface. If this video moved you, if it made you feel something, drop a comment below and tell me which case hit you the hardest. Like this video so more people can find these stories. And if you haven't subscribed to the Story Vault yet, now is the time. We do this every week, we open the files, we tell the stories, and we make sure the names are never forgotten. I'll see you in the next one.